our program manager, Nick Horner. Feel free to post questions and or comments there as well. And finally, let us remember to remain respectful, open, and growth-centered as a community, even as we engage with sensitive and or challenging subjects. At the place George Mason University occupies, we give greetings and thanksgivings to the Diog ancestors, the enslaved and rightfully freed African Americans, the Manahoic, Rappahannock, Pamunkey, Mattaponi, Upper Mattaponi, Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Nansmoon, Manakin, Potawatomi, Nottoway, and Piscataway tribes who lovingly stewarded these lands past, present, and future. I invite you to acknowledge the indigenous stewards of the land wherever you are by writing their names in the chat. By way of introduction, E. Patrick Johnson is Dean of the School of Communication and an Annenberg University professor at Northwestern University. He is a 2020 inductee into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, a prolific performer / scholar, an inspiring teacher whose research and artistry has greatly impacted African American studies, performance studies, gender and sexuality studies. E. Patrick, AKA Dr. EPJ, is the author of Appropriating Blackness, Performance, and the Politics of Authenticity, Sweet Tea, Black Gay Men of the South, and Oral History, Black, period, Queer, period, Southern, period, Women, period, and Oral History, and Honeypot, Black Southern Women Who Love Women, in addition to several edited and co-edited collections, essays, and plays. E. Patrick's written and performance work dovetail intimately. His stage reading, Pouring Tea, Black Gay Men of the South Tell Their Stories, has toured to over 100 college campuses since 2006. The full-length performance, Sweet Tea, the play, premiered in Chicago, toured across 8 other cities, and to the National Black Theater Festival. Our guest artist is also among the subjects and co-executive producers of the film Making Sweet Tea, which has received several awards, including Best LGBTQ Film at the San Diego Film Festival, Best Documentary Audience at the Out on Film Festival, and the Silver Image Award from the Association of American Retired Peoples, also known as AARP, for positive representation of LGBTQ people over 50 at the Chicago Reeling LGBTQ Film Festival. Please join me in welcoming the always compelling E. Patrick Johnson to the virtual stage. Welcome, my friend, welcome.
It is so wonderful to be with you.
It is my pleasure.
As always.
It is a pleasure. One of the great treats about doing this series is that I really get to learn more about what the people I most admire have been up to. So as always, I like to start by asking about your background. I think all work is informed by culture, identity, history. I'm curious about how your life experience has informed your creative practice. Could you tell us a bit about where you're from, how your biography has informed, grounded, and or challenged your work?
I love talking about where I come from because it influenced, my journey forward. I come from a small town in Western North Carolina called Hickory, or as we say, Hickory.
Here we go.
Hickory. And it is known for furniture. At one point, Hickory was one of the largest manufacturers of furniture in the world. And the Black community there in Hickory all lived in the same part of town called Ridgeview, separated, as many of these southern towns are, racially by a set of railroad tracks. tracks.
No train tracks. Mhm.
And Ridgeview was a place where um, all things Black happened, including art and culture. Because Ridgeview had its own grocery stores, theaters, cab stands, all the things, it really was a little mini city unto itself.
Mm.
And my older siblings even talk about uh, artists who were on the Chitlin circuit back
Ah,
in
there
the
we
day,
go.
coming through Hickory and performing in Ridgeview because they couldn't perform on the north side of town
Yeah.
where the white folks, but there were venues in Ridgeview. They talk about like the Drifters and the Spinners and
Wow.
those folks coming through Hickory, and I'm like, Hickory? And they're like, yeah, don't
Wow.
sleep on Hickory. But as a child, I was exposed to African American poetry, like Paul Laurence Dunbar. The first poem I ever heard and then later memorized is this dialect poem by Paul Laurence Dunbar called "In the Morning." Lies, lies, bless the Lord. Don't you know the days abroad? If you don't get up, you scamp, there'll be trouble in this here camp. Think I going to let you sleep while I make sure board keep? Well, that's I put it how they do. Lies, don't you hear me? So my cousin performed, every talent show, whatever she performed, In the Morning by Paul
I
Laurence.
love it. I love it.
So that kind of space for expressive culture,
Mhm.
creativity was a part of my childhood, and really exposed me to um, Black art, Black plays, Black literature, because I wasn't getting that in
In
school.
schools. Yeah. Mhm.
Um, and the other thing I'll say is the notion of ritual. Now, I wouldn't have known what I was experiencing back then, but now that I look back at it, there were always some form of ritual happening, either through sort of Christian traditions like prayer,
Yes.
but even those were uh, sort of ritualized, as it were. I'll give you an example. In church, for the offertory prayer by Reverend Roscoe Connor,
Love it.
he gave the offertory prayer. It was the same prayer every single Sunday. So, we kids would
Yeah,
say,
that
oh Lord,
became
it's Reverend Connor. We know he's gonna say, we do thank you, dear Lord, for one more day. Bless those that have to give. Bless those that don't have it to give. Bless those that have to give, but they were somehow hindered.
well.
Here I am, 50 years later, I remember.
Still remember that, but that became the ritual then. Is what you're
That
saying.
became the
Yeah.
ritual.
Yeah.
And, the Easter plays, the Christmas plays, and all
Yes.
the things
Yes. Yes.
was
Yes.
the,
Yes.
the place, the site of
Yes.
performance as I know it today.
Yes. And I know from conversations with you, previous conversations with you, and a little bit about your work, that the church was also central to your own sort of embodiment of voice, whether it was through spoken word and poetry or through song. I know that you began singing very early in life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's interesting. Just yesterday, I was a part of a oral history project at UNC Chapel Hill, which
Mhm.
is my alma mater. And it was an oral history project called The Story of Us, which is based on oral histories from the LGBTQ alums.
Uh-huh.
And I performed my own story.
Oh, wonderful.
And I mention it now because one of the one of the themes throughout my story was how important the choir was for me as a child, and then even at college, because the space of the choir was the site of whole lots of things that didn't have nothing necessarily to do with spirituality.
There we go. There we go.
um, it was a space where you could express something other than the Holy Ghost.
Okay. I'm
And
between the lines. I'm with you. I'm with
yeah,
you.
but again, of course, when I was a child, I didn't know that. I just know that, I had on this robe and I was working this robe and I felt good about working this robe and singing my soprano and
Love
doing
it.
all those things,
Love it.
just queening out.
Yes. Yes.
And that behavior was being encouraged
Wow. Okay.
by the church
By the church. Okay.
uh, until it wasn't. Um,
Right. Right.
but it was a wonderful, exciting time in my life.
Mm, mm. That's
Very,
beautiful.
very exciting.
That's beautiful. Um, like institutions of higher learning everywhere, George Mason is engaged in difficult but necessary conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. This guest artist series actually grew out of a desire to further that conversation by developing more awareness of the ways in which the underrepresentation of marginalized voices persist in the American theater, and becoming more familiar with artists and scholars engaged in conversation for radical change, social justice, cultivating more comfort and proficiency when talking about race, power, and privilege. For me, anti-racist theater is synonymous with inclusive theater, right? A space that addresses racial disparity, centers the stories of women, members of the queer community, disabled folk, and other marginalized identities. And for some of us, of course, we traverse multiple identities. Um, to those unfamiliar with your pedagogy and your productions, can you speak to some of the ways intersectionality is integral to your work?
Yes, I think that people forget that we're never just one thing,
Right,
ever.
right, right.
From the moment we, peek out from our mother's womb into this world, we are never one thing.
Mhm.
Um, how we experience our multiplicity is something altogether different. Um, because part of that negotiation is reacting to how other folks are seeing us the way they want to see us, as opposed to the way that we want to be seen.
Mm,
Part of it is also how we evolve into different things over the course of our lives.
yes.
I'm very thankful that I'm not what I used to be.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
There's a gospel song called "A Change Has Come Over Me."
Yes, yes.
And a change has come over me, and I continue to evolve, as I hope we all do. Um, and in terms of how we capture that in theater, in performance, I think is multifold. One is, as you said, through representation, making sure that the stories are just put on the stage. Because as you know,
Mhm,
um,
mhm.
that's not always a guarantee
Right.
that you can even have stories on stage that represent other something other than the dominant culture.
Right. Right.
So that's one. But then the second part, and this is one of the things I try to engage in my own work, is once you have a space to represent the other, that representation not be a simplistic representation,
Mhm.
that there's multiplicity within our community as well.
Mhm.
When I started collecting stories of Black queer men of the South, for instance, one of the things that I noted is that not everybody is a Christian.
Surprise, surprise. Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
You
But
know,
there is that assumption perhaps, right?
of
Particularly,
course,
right, about Black culture in the South,
yes,
right?
that everybody is Christian, everybody is, Baptist, Methodist, or Apostolic, or whatever the case may be. But I met Muslim, I
Mhm.
met atheists, I met
Mhm.
agnostic. Um, and so that kind of inclusivity is also important.
Mhm.
So that those of us who are in these marginalized communities that we don't take for granted a kind of monolithic perspective within our own communities. I think that's really important. And that's one of the things that I have tried to do in my own work. The other thing is, it's funny that you mentioned the Silver Image Award that we got from the AARP. I was like,
I love that.
wait.
I love that.
But one of the things I don't think we talk enough about, and we may get into this later on in our conversation, the elders,
There we go. Mhm. Mhm.
folks who came before us, who paved the way to make it possible for us to do the stuff that we're doing today, and who are still with us, who's still paving the way. Uh, and that's the other thing that is really important to me in my work, and not just with queer folk, but with Black folk in general. One of my probably most, at least for me, important essays is based on wisdom imparted to me from my grandmother. The way she says queer was queer. That's a queer child. And the whole point was to emphasize that as Black folk, as working class folk, as gender nonconforming folks, as cis folks, all the things, we have to work together. We can't afford to be a single focus
Mhm.
folk.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and so, despite my grandmother's homophobia, she is also integral to my own strategies of resistance.
Yes. Yes.
So it's, you talk about intersectionality, it's not like you're divided up like a slice of pie.
Right. Exactly. Mhm.
Um, these things are situational, historical, overlapping, and so on and so forth. And nuance. We don't do nuance very well
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
at all. We want, this sort of black and white.
Yeah,
But that's not the way the world
it's
works.
not reality, right?
No.
Um, one of the things I love about the forward in Sweet Tea, the play, which your collaborator slash producer, is it Jane M. Sachs? Is that
Yes.
how you say her name? Which Jane writes, she says, part of my work is to actually try and shift what is considered the mainstream canon by adding to the historical record and forever changing who is counted and valued, who participates, has agency, and shows up. If we add to that canon and shift it, it is never the same. And I know a number of us, you and me included, but certainly a number of us on this call have been engaged in this work for a long time. I love this framing, though, as one strategy for decentering the dominant narrative. So I'm wondering if you had to offer one more strategy for creating a more inclusive theater, what that might be, particularly in academia, where I feel like this discourse is really, sometimes it's challenging, right?
Yeah. I think that many people have a particular or a specific idea of what constitutes theater.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Yeah.
then we started this conversation with you asking me about, basically who are people. Sharon Bridgeforth
Yeah.
had me on one of her shows early on. Who are your people?
Yeah.
Um,
Please.
so most of the performances that went on in my community were not plays as such.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were scripted from the everyday experiences of the folk in the community.
Hmm.
And they were sometimes based on not even, oral history in the way that I do them, where I interview someone and transcribe. Is like you talk to somebody and then all of a sudden that story gets them a show. Um, and so I come to theater as someone who wasn't I've been never trained as an actor ever.
Mhm.
Never took one acting class in my entire life.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so I come to performance differently than many people. And how that relates to your question about how we can be another strategy for being inclusive in the academy, in the academic space, is um, dismantling our notion of what constitutes theater.
Okay now. All right. Mhm.
Um, because it's Shakespeare is wonderful. The Bard is amazing
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
has been generative to uh, theater practice. But we've had folks on the street corner rapping in our own communities just as long as Shakespeare has been around,
Well, dancing, singing, the whole thing.
doing
Yeah.
all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And so bringing those kinds of
Mm.
stories,
Mm.
practices, rituals, aesthetics to the space of the academy um, can also be transformative and enlightening for students. And I don't say that as a way to suggest that we should uh, throw out all the other stuff,
Right.
but we're talking about inclusivity. I'm talking about alongside.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
talking about uh, that notion of breaking bread together.
Yes.
Can we just get an invitation to the table? Can
Hello.
you pass the bread? And then have somebody make some good potato salad too.
Hello. Well, not too much to ask. Yes. Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
about bringing other forms to that space. It's about adding to the canon in a way that is collaborative, experiential,
Mm-hmm.
and also a site of knowledge production. Uh,
Yeah.
Even the Black children who are being educated today need to know about this. Going back to my comment about the elders, these folks don't know. You know, they on TikTok doing their thing, but they don't know. We had another version of TikTok a long time ago.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
It's called a barbershop.
Hello. All right. Say that. Say that. Um, yeah, I'm keeping a running list of terms because some of my students, I think a couple of them at least, are on the call. And there may be questions, what's the Chitlin circuit? Who is Paul Lawrence Dunbar? Yeah,
Hmm.
all of that. But I love this idea of reframing theater because it just expands the definition. It's a definition that becomes inclusive of the ways that people within our communities express themselves that may not, you know, I agree. I love the Bard. I love Greek classics. I love contemporary theater. That's my jam too. But let's open it up. Let's open the
Yeah.
conversation up. I'm wondering, if there's a specific moment within your trajectory as an artist or educator that really reverberates for you as sort of one transformational thing that happened.
You know, I don't know that I can point to to just
I know it's a tall
one.
order. It's a tall order, but you know, you can take a couple if you need to. That's fine too.
I do know that it's sort of like a variation of a theme. So when I went to college, I initially majored in theater.
Oh,
Uh, and quickly found out that that wasn't going to be the thing for me, mainly because as an undergraduate in a theater program that had a MFA acting program and a repertory company, I wasn't going to get cast in shows.
okay.
Undergraduates weren't just
Yeah.
I wasn't going to get those experiences. So I found my way over to what was then called speech communication. Now it's communication studies. And within that department, there was this thing called oral interpretation of literature.
Uh-oh. Now we're talking.
And undergraduates got to, perform literature, adapt it to the stage, and so on and so forth. And then D. Soyini Madison was hired as a faculty member my sophomore year. And I started taking classes with her in performance of Black literature, performance of women of color, and oral history. And it was the coming together of all of those things that was like, again, letting me know that there were other ways to create theater than the traditional form. So, I was in a traveling performance of oral histories that were adapted to the stage
Yes.
or based on cotton mill workers in the South.
Okay.
And that was the first time I'd ever been in a performance based on real people's stories that was then presented back to those communities.
Yeah.
That was sort of life-changing to me because this light bulb went off. It's like, these stories are from people from marginalized communities. They've been validated through this oral history project or book, but then we can embody those stories and present those stories back to those folks and validate them even more. So that all happened as an undergraduate at UNC Chapel.
Yes. Yes.
And
Wow. Wow.
so that was a pivotal moment for me. And I guess the other moment for me was in graduate school when I was trying to think about how to write this essay about what I was experiencing. I couldn't even name it. I
Okay.
knew that, so this was the early 90s, and queer theory and gender theory, all that stuff was the rage.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and I was here for it. I was like, yes, yes, yes. And yet I wasn't seeing anybody talk about what it meant to be Black and gay. There was a whole lot of stuff about white gay men,
Predominantly. Yep.
predominantly, and lesbian, and forget about a T. And even forget about a B. It was just L and a G.
And the G.
And it was white.
Yes.
But I couldn't really articulate what it was I was experiencing, and it wasn't coming together in the form of an essay.
Yeah.
So what came about was a script, a performance called Strange Fruit. And and when I look back at Strange Fruit now, I was like, oh my God, this was such the product of a graduate student. 'Cause, I was drawing from all these theories that I was learning at the time. The
Yes,
show
yes.
opens with the first paragraph from one of Hortense Spiller's most famous essays, Mama's Baby, Papa's Maybe. Um, I'm a marked woman, but not everybody knows my name. Peaches, brown sugar, sugar, auntie, earth mother,
Wow.
God's holy
Yeah.
food,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. So there was a lot of theory
Yeah.
in
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
forming theory, but it was a wonderful moment for me as a scholar, but also as a performer, because it um, demonstrated for me how theory and practice can be interwoven,
Right.
how the theory informs the practice and how the practice informs the theory. Uh-oh.
Attention, attention.
What is that?
Well, I'm not sure. It may be a false alarm. I'm in a hotel room, so I'm
Yeah.
not
I
sure.
hope it's not a fire alarm or something. Anyway, we will see. If we
Okay,
start
we'll
seeing
see.
smoke and then your screen goes black, we will know what happened.
Yeah, I think we're good, but we'll see. So yeah, it was a moment where theory and performance and theory came together for me,
Yes. Yes.
and such a learning experience. And that show um, ended up traveling,
Mm.
and I published the script in
Yeah.
the drama review.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so those two early experiences, finding this, oral interpretation, oral history, and this show were two moments that
Mhm.
have been very instructional in my practice as a solo performer in particular.
And I think both of those experiences show up in your work today. But before we move on, I just got to say, I'm really impressed that you can still remember these words. I can't remember what I said yesterday, let alone 20 years ago. So, E. Patrick, that's up to you. Okay. Since we've been talking about framing, and I just have a couple more questions, and I'm going to open it up. I could go on and talk to you for another hour, but we've been talking about framing, and we're moving into a unit in my playwriting class, starting with Sweet Tea, the play, which looks at what has been now called verbatim theater. I wonder if you call the work that you do during the interviews verbatim theater, or if for you they're oral histories, which also speaks to another tradition, right? And this is about framing as well, of course.
I do not call the work that I do verbatim theater.
Yeah.
And I say that because um, that is a particular aesthetic
Yeah.
where there is attention to, you know, verbal tics and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
stutters and so on and so forth. And while I am interested in some of those things, for me, it's um, more than that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's about capturing or trying to capture the essence of the story. So I may give a little bit of that through dialect, whether
Yeah.
it's Freddie and his Southern Georgia accent, or CC from Mississippi who sound like a drug Bill Cosby. Um, some of those things to give you just a
Yes.
little
Yes.
snippet of them. But
Yeah.
what I'm really wanting is the audience to lean into the story that they're telling,
Great. Okay.
as opposed to becoming fixated or fascinated by, my dexterity as a performer that I can do the stutters and all of those.
Yeah, right. The
kinds of things.
Anna Devere Smith method, really.
Yeah.
I know she does that. Okay, great. One more question. And then I'm going to open up. But who is creating theater? And we can use that term as broadly as we would like to. Who is creating theater that inspires you, past, present, and why?
You know who I am I'm mad at him because watching his play, even more so than my work, it's like, get out of my head. I mean, you are the interiority of being Black and gay and Southern, you have just put on the stage for everybody to see. Michael R. Jackson's play, A Strange Loop.
Strange Loop. Yeah.
Baby, when I tell you, all the things, he went there.
He went there. Yeah.
He went there. And to be in a audience with mostly white people, it was, I was having an out of body experience, because I'm like, these are all, all of the angst and the family drama and the internalized hatred, all that stuff. He just put it out there.
He did. And I had a similar experience. I saw it here at Woolly Mammoth, actually. And it was like, ooh, I was sitting in my chair going, he said that.
Yeah.
He's saying that. Yes, all the things.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that kind of bravery,
that's what he was.
and courage, I admire, and it pushes me as an artist to to be even more courageous in what I do, because I still am of a certain generation. I don't put all my tea out there. But then I have to self-examine as to why. Is there still some investment in what we've come to call, respectability politics?
Yes.
So he's certainly someone that I'm like, And another another person of his generation is Terrell McCraney. I've always been impressed with Terrell's work and how he, as we were saying earlier, sort of cracks open these traditional theater frames, bringing Yoruba practices in the work and ritual, and portraying Black sexuality in very complicated and nuanced ways.
Yes.
I continue to be inspired and admired by his work.
Yeah, these are two of my favorites. I invite you all to turn your cameras on if you feel comfortable doing so. Would love to see as many faces as possible. This is about building community as much as it is about being in conversation. And if you have questions, raise your hand, either a real hand or virtual hand. I will try to acknowledge you as best I can. Or if you would like to put a question in the chat, I also invite you to do it that way. And my colleague, Philip Wilkerson, has his hand up, so I'm going to acknowledge him. Welcome.
I was looking for the mute button. Sorry. I'm on my phone too, because I can try to multitask. But first of all, I'd like to say thank you. Is it Professor Johnson? Is it Professor Johnson? I want to make sure I use the correct titles and appropriately.
Doctor. I was Dean.
Thank you, Dean Johnson. And I definitely, titles matter, and and saying you earned that doctorate and that deanship. So Dean Johnson, thank you so much for your time. And this is a wonderful conversation. Obviously, I learned a lot and really appreciate you sharing your experiences with us. I think one thing that you really said that stood out to me was about the intersection of, as you were studying LGBTQ, not seeing many Black people represented in that study. I'm currently getting my PhD in communication, and Blackness is integral to my study. And obviously like that experience. But also what's been very helpful is that while my studies focus on Blackness, I have the good fortune and blessing of having mentorship that are Black, to see people that paved the way before me and can give me guidance, particularly Black male educators, Black male doctorates. So I ask them, about that hidden curriculum. How'd you navigate this? How you navigate that? And honestly, beyond the classroom, that's probably been more important or more helpful to me. So my question for you is, was there in that aspect of someone that shared your identities to be a guide or mentor during your doctoral process, and more so later on in your career process, someone that shared your identities and you reached out to them and they gave you some mentorship?
Thank you, Phil, for that question. Absolutely. Interestingly enough, just as my childhood was filled with mostly women, Black women, who were responsible for everything, from my grandmother, my mother, but also other Black women elders in my community who exposed me to art. The same thing for my educational journey, my academic journey. People like D. Soyini Madison, who I mentioned before, who was integral to introducing me to oral history and performance. Trudy Harris, who introduced me to Black folklore. And the list goes on and on. Interestingly enough, I didn't have any Black gay male professors in my entire academic career, like none. Now I had classmates and colleagues along the way, but no professors. I did have some Black straight male professors who were integral. Lee Green, who was a English professor at UNC Chapel Hill, I had as an undergraduate and was integral to my training, particularly as a writer. I got one of the worst grades I ever got in life from Dr. Green, because he's very a stickler for good writing. But I learned a lot, and people cared about you, and they would pull you to the side and say, look, young blood, you're gonna have to pull this tight if you're going to proceed. So I can't stress enough how important it was for me to have Black professors, because they weren't just mentors to me in terms of my intellectual growth, but they were also just literally supportive of me to get through the program emotionally, financially. Soyini Madison wrote a check to help me pay my rent.
Wow, there you go. Yeah.
Trudy Harris fed me on a number of different occasions. So it was more than just, book learning. These were folks who came out of community, who knew what community would mean to Black students in the academic space. So it was putting the theory into practice. It wasn't just talking about it. So I've tried to carry on that tradition in my own pedagogy. I often feed students, have them over, and but also, I don't suffer fools. I'm like, you got to pull this tight. because I'm compassionate, but I'm also serious about the work. And that is the way I was trained and the way that I was ushered into this field, and it saved me actually. So having the both and the compassion, but also the seriousness about the work. So in other words, I'm gonna create a space, a safe space for you, but you're gonna have to do the work as well.
Great, thank you. Other questions, comments? Anything? Yes, hello there.
Hello,
Keith,
Dr. Branner.
how
Thank
are you?
for this. I'm good. Thank you, Dr. E. Patrick, for gracing us with your presence.
Thank you, Dr. Clark. This is one of my good Judies, y'all.
And I appreciate that mentioning of Dr. J. Lee Green, who, as my dissertation director, often pulled me to the side to tell me, brother, you got to tighten this up. So Doc, I have actually wanted just a brief comment and then a question. So I really appreciate your referencing things like the Chitlin Circuit and Paul Laurence Dunbar, because it really shows that you are in a tradition of African-American vernacular culture, African-American literary culture. I remember one of our mentors, you mentioned Trudia Harris, and I remember a comment she made about, when you study African-American literature, you just don't start with Toni Morrison. You got to know the whole body. You got to know the feet. You got to know the ankles. So you really make us take that journey back. So I appreciate the fact that you are so, mentioning things like Strange Fruit, that you are really grounded in that tradition. My question is, so when Dr. Branner asked you initially about your biography and your background, and you started in Hickory, of course. And so I started thinking about your sort of geographical biography. It made me think of Richard Wright. So I'm sure that's somebody you know to compare it to. But Richard Wright also started from the South, and he went to Chicago and did, wrote a lot of his major work from there and then abroad, of course. But I'm just wondering, how important was it for you to sort of leave the South and then to sort of look back on your experiences and then to articulate them both in your creative work and in your scholarly work? In other words, do you think that journey out was important for you to then take the journey back and to, sort of relook at, revisit, process, or not?
Great question.
Oh, that is an excellent question. I'll respond in two ways. In a certain way, not necessarily leaving the South, but leaving the South that I knew was important. Because as I was saying earlier, we're not monolithic. The South certainly is not monolithic. And so my experience of growing up in Western North Carolina, which, as you know, is different from the rest of North Carolina, was also very different from my experience of living in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. That was a whole other kind of Southern experience there than I had experienced. When I moved there to go to graduate school and people asked me where I was from, I said, North Carolina. They said, oh, you're not from the South. And I was like, what are you talking about? And then the longer I lived there, the more I understood what they were talking about. It was some special kind of racism going on there that I certainly had not experienced growing up in North Carolina. So part of it was not just leaving the South, but it was leaving my the corner of the South that I knew to experience other parts of the South to help me understand the ways in which Black Southern life varied depending on where you were geographically. Even, the of course, the speech, the way we talk, the way we communicate. I didn't know what making groceries was until I went to Louisiana. So that's one part of it. And then leaving Louisiana and moving to Massachusetts for my first job at Amherst College. Yeah, that did give me yet another experience of the South, in terms of I moved out of the South, but the South didn't move out of me. I carried all of that to New England, which was also a very interesting experience. Having gone to public schools, both all throughout K through 12, undergrad, master's, and PhD, and then arriving in New England, in a place where everybody went to Harvard, Yale, Princeton. So all of that, and then moving back to North Carolina, yet a different experience, and that's when I created Strange Fruit. And I don't know if you were in the audience when I performed.
I was. It wasn't the product of a graduate student. It was superb.
Oh,
It was.
thank
It was
you.
really. I remember it to this day. It was fabulous. So.
Thank you for that. Well, one of the things that I was going to say relative to this question you asked, having moved away from the South, then coming back and performing that show with an audience of Black gay men who were having the same experience I just had in a Strange Loop, like, you putting all our tea on the stage. Because my distance at that point, the distance that I had from the South, gave me a certain kind of courage to perform that show in that space, in a way that I know that I would not have had the courage to do had I not moved from the South. And then moving to Chicago, that was an altogether another experience, because, as you know, Chicago is just up South. Everybody there is from, Louisiana, Arkansas, Tennessee, whatever. They just came up the Mississippi. And so there's this, wonderfully rich Southern diasporic community, Black community in Chicago, that has this whole, also its own tradition, literary tradition, arts tradition there, because people talk about the Harlem Renaissance, where there was also a Chicago Renaissance that happened at the same time, Gwendolyn Brooks and Third World Press with Hakeem Madhubuti starting there, and so on. And so I was then sort of entrenched in this wonderfully rich Black artistic community in Chicago that was multi-generational, which also helped me think differently about what it means to be from different places from the South and then leave the South, as many of those Chicago folks have. And the other interesting thing, how they brought some of those Black Southern folk ways to Chicago. Like, my partner, who is white, we lived on the South Side of Chicago. And it was a couple of years before we realized most of the people around us were gay. And just like in the South, where, you don't necessarily go to a club, you just go to someone's house, the house party. We went to one house party, and it was like, you gay, you gay, you. I mean, it wasn't about being out in the way that white gay folks talk about being out, with rainbow flags and all that stuff. It's just, and it's also not about being closeted.
Right.
I want to make that point. It's about being in the world in the way that Black folks be in the world. And it's about a kind of Southern, I don't even know what to call it, passive aggressive, or, you know, you don't say somebody ugly, you say bless her heart, you know? All of that was on the south side of Chicago. So that too gave me a very different perspective of what it means to be Black and a Southerner.
Yeah,
Thank you for that.
I love it. I love it. And thank you for your question, Dr. Clark. I think that's a really great question. I was thinking to myself, yeah, maybe I had to leave South Central before I could write about it, that experience. You know, I was a product of the great Black migration west. You know, my folks didn't go north, they went west. And so I was first generation who came out of that. But it also brings with it a certain way that Black folks are, right? When they migrate, there's something, and I know we create culture wherever we go, right? As you're talking about a certain way of being that Black folks have, that resonates for me wherever we are. Hello, stranger, Onawumi, good to see you.
You're on mute.
Yeah, you're
Unmute
muted.
yourself. There you go.
I refuse to be a stranger in this strange land.
Hello.
And you all have helped me even feel more like I'm not a stranger in this strange land, because you're interpreting it on stage and in classroom. And I'm very, very thankful for that. Double entendre. It's our coded way of speaking.
Mhm.
Yeah. She ain't fat, baby. No, she just pleasingly plump. Yes, and the sounds that go with it. Mm.
Mm.
Mm, 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 mm. Mm, 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 mm. There's a whole play right there.
That's right.
Exactly.
You just spoke volumes right there.
Because that's the passive aggressive way that we were able to be safe enough to talk with one another without, as E. Patrick has said, spilling all your tea.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It is a necessary defense even today.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so it makes sense that when someone is full-throated, it's because of works like yours, E. Patrick, and like yours, Brana, Jola. It is that work that is lighting their way as other folks have lit your way to
Mhm.
be as forthcoming as you are. And you've heard people say just today, you have been very forthcoming. I have had the privilege in your early years to give you your first pair of high heel shoes. Yes, I
That's
did.
real tea. Come on. That's the real tea.
We were on the stage. Yeah. I, as a storyteller, but I've loved E. Patrick's way of being in the world since I first laid. I loved him when he had hair.
Okay.
I looked up and here comes on Amherst College campus, this bright sunlight. And I said, well, who is that? Oh, he's in the English. Here? So one of my colleagues met him and she said, oh, I've got to find him a girlfriend. I said, for what? The child is beautifully gay. She just stopped talking. She's a Southerner. I have a lot of godchildren who are from all parts of the country, who are women who love women and men who love men. And I love all of you. I went to E. Patrick's doctoral graduation. I asked to go. And he said it was all right to come. And I met his mother. And in meeting her, I'm from Tennessee, I met all the women of the world that I'd ever known. She worked in the community for the NAACP. She worked in the community cooking for women who couldn't cook for themselves. She worked with the sick. She worked without any notion of not doing it. It was her calling. And when she talked about her sons, she talked about them with deep love. And one of the things that she taught me, Miss Sarah, that's what you call her. She's an ancestor, but she is Miss Sarah. And don't anybody ever forget it. Miss Sarah taught me what it means to love all of your children, no matter what. Now, I could do that outside of my family, but I was still putting that together at the time that I met her. And that heart is inside of this young man who just spoke, E. Patrick Johnson. This his heart beats in him 365 days, 24 hours a day. And he passes it on. But as he said, his own addition is he does not suffer fools. He's not here to make it easy for you, except to make it safe for you to do your work. Get on with the business of doing your work. And Jola, this session, and I have not missed one of your sessions, I don't believe, of artists. This is homecoming. This is homecoming. You, with your Western upbringing, E. Patrick with his Southern upbringing, living examples of how intersection works, living example of how differences work, living examples of how brilliance and persistence and awe, being awed by the new coming folk works.
Yes.
I am very blessed that among my children, my LBGT, every other alphabet children, I'm very blessed to have you all in my family and for you to accept me as being a little bit on the fringes, but hey, even from there I can shout.
Hello.
I'm just saying. And I have been very, well, anyway, I don't spill all my tea either.
But you're
That's
part of our
bless
family too.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take good care.
Thank
And thank you for, just thank you. Thank you for just sitting tall, standing tall, doing, woo, shouting tall business. I mean, this is a time to just go, let the church
Say amen.
amen. Oh,
Yeah.
let the church say amen.
Well,
Children have spoken. So let the church say amen.
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 Thank you. Philip, I think you have another question or comment. Jump in there.
Yeah, yes, I do. And it's my last question, but as you know, I don't jump in as much as as often as the previous speaker, but I definitely, every time I see her, I definitely expect her to say something to drop gems on all of us. And I actually take notes and mental notes, but every time I've seen you in this space, you shared so much. And it actually does feel like you feel very familiar, like family. When you talk, you bring up a lot for me as well. It's kind of like therapeutic. One thing I thought about is, the notion of allyship compared to co-conspiratorship. Everyone said that they can be an ally, and that's sometimes very performative, but I think it's better when someone says that they are not just an ally, they're a conspirator, they're in the trenches. And, while I do not have a lived experience as a gay male, I want to be authentic in regards to my allyship, more so taking it to the next level of co-conspiratorship, particularly with family. I have a cousin. I don't know, just what would you, growing up, you said you had a grandma that, exhibited homophobia. I have that now in my own family, like aunts and uncles, where I check them. I'm like, you don't say that now. We don't talk like that. And it's kind of like, all right, they listen to me now. They still call me Little Phil. My dad's Big Phil, I'm Little Phil. And so I feel like I have more of a voice now. They don't see me as much as a kid. They do actually see me as, a father with kids. So they listen to me more. But can you speak to that, more so like authentic allyship, or more so taking it to the next level of co-conspiratorship, like maybe even with your mentor? You said you had a straight mentor that maybe not just the mentorship and grading you, but actually vouched for you, or, really spoke up for you in rooms that you didn't want to speak up in, things like that. That's the question I have.
Oh, that's a really great question, and one that, is hard for a lot of people who want to be allies, because again, it takes courage to be a true ally. And the time that you need to be an ally and takes the most courage is when the folks that you're being courageous for are not in the room, when you just amongst your own. So that means if you are not a gay person, but you are in a space with only straight folk, and they go into the homophobic thing, what do you do when they go into the homophobic thing? Do you sit there in silence? Or do you speak up? White folk who are amongst themselves without us in the room, and if you are an ally to Black folks and folks are saying racist stuff, what do? Do you, again, sit in silence? Because that, in that moment of not saying anything, you're co-signing what's going on. And one of the most difficult things I think for anybody is, and we all enjoy some form of privilege, all of us do. But one of the things I tell my students is that one of the most difficult things for any of us is to work against your own privilege, dismantling your own privilege. So yes, I'm Black, I am gay, but I'm also a male. So that means that if I am not out there speaking up and against sexism and misogyny, then I'm part of the problem, because I benefit from male privilege. So I know it's tricky, I know it's hard, and it takes courage. And it takes gumption. And it doesn't always have to manifest itself in calling people out. It can manifest itself in just asking a question. So someone's making a sexist or misogynist terms of, well, do you feel that way about your mother?
Yeah.
So those kind of things that make people self-reflect on the very thing that they're saying. But again, that doesn't happen overnight, and not all of us have the courage to step up in every situation, but that's one of the things that we have to do. if we're going to be true allies, or as you're saying, co-conspirators.
Mhm.
And then the other thing I'll say is, it's also important for us to wield our positions of power in strategic ways. I never wanted to be the dean of anything, nothing. I turned this job down twice. And because I was minding my own business, I was on sabbatical and doing my thing. And who would want to become a dean in the middle of a global pandemic as I did? Who? I raise your hand. So I got this job at the worst time possible. But having been in it for now a little over 2.5 years, I know that I was the right person for the job at the right time. I talk about in my first issue of the alumni magazine how I was called to do this work. As Black in the Black folk preaching tradition, folks are called to preach. It's usually when they're down and out on their sick bed, and the Lord speaks to them that they're called. I shared that story of how I was called. I said it was a literal call. The search firm called me, and I said no, thank you, twice. But I do think it was a calling for me to be in this position because, again, as Joel and I started this conversation, all of who I am today comes from Ridgeview. And having a grandmother and having a mother and having other folk in my community who crossed the railroad tracks to the white side of town to work in white folks' houses means that when I came into the space of academia and I saw and I see the folks who clean the spaces that we teach and learn in, those are the people that I'm going to speak to first.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Those are the folks that I'm going to be fighting for to get their wages raised.
Mm.
So having a person like me in this position matters so that I can wield and leverage the position to do some good in the world. And that comes from, again, the place from where I come from, the place I know. Because I know that my grandmother and my mother made a way out of no way, the same way that those folks who are doing the grunt work, as it were, in the spaces that we have the privilege to stand in front of folks and depart wisdom in. And I remind my students and my graduate students of that all the time. You're complaining and whining about this, but did you say thank you to Mr. Joe, who just came and fixed the, whatever it is that was broke in this classroom so you could see the film so we could go on about our business?
That part right there.
That part.
The way that this conversation has gone right now, it gives me hope, because one of my biggest concerns, E. Patrick, is that we went through this period, during the pandemic, on the heels of the murder of George Floyd, Black Lives Matter movement. And then we had the pandemic to serve as a crucible for all of us to do a lot of self-reflection. And we really started to sort of make demands, we see you, white America, and so forth and so on. But my fear has been sometimes that that movement, that momentum is waning, and we got to keep it going. I know a lot of us have been engaged in this work for a very long time. We will continue to be engaged in that work long after this moment in time. But I think conversations like this with you just remind us of how critical this work is, and how, as you said, you was called to be dean. You may not have, you may not have had it in your conscious mind, But yeah, you were called to be dean. And before I sign off, tell us about the series you curate called Dialogue with the Dean, because I know you've had some great guests in that, John Lucasamo and Terrell McCrane. Go tell us about that.
Yeah, so in the same way I want to be dean because I want to continue to teach and do my research and performance. I knew that once I took the job that I could not just be solely an administrator. I had to find some kind of way to stay involved in my creative work
There we
and
go. I see you.
intellectual work. And you know, sitting in my house in front of this for 10 to 12 hours, I was like, I gotta find something.
Yeah.
You gotta find a way. So I created what I call my Oprah show, called Dialogue with the Dean. And Dialogue with the Dean is a platform similar to this, where I invite artists and scholars and thought leaders on to have a conversation with me. And it has been one of the most rewarding
Nice. Nice.
events that I've created. And it's we're sort of a victim of our own success, because I've had such high-powered folks on the show now. It's like, I don't know how we can sustain this because, you know, I've had John Leguizamo, Terrell McCraney, Mara Brock-Akil. In 3 weeks, I'm going to have Anna Gasteyer from Saturday Night Live. So, you know, I'm like, oh,
it'll keep going. It'll keep going. Build it and you will come. It's wonderful. Is there a way that we can access those conversations?
yes,
Okay.
absolutely. They, first of all, they're all live streamed.
Yeah.
So they happen, you know, live, but we stream them, and then they live on the website at Northwestern.
Okay.
If
I'll
you go
look.
to www.soc.northwestern.edu, which is the School of Communication website, and click on events, you'll see the whole, you know, Dialogue with the Dean interviews.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna put it up there. We are losing some folks because some of our faculty teach at 1:30.
Okay.
Can I ask
if you do it quickly, yes,
very quickly, and I don't expect a full-on answer. Do you ever talk about bigotry, E. Patrick? Do you ever talk about it, and do you talk about it, and what are the outcomes of talking about it? And any reference you can give to me, because from the stage, I want to have references so that I talk about it in story.
Yeah, so I don't necessarily talk about bigotry explicitly, as opposed to giving demonstrations of bigotry in my performances. If that does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then during the Q&A, because I tell people all the time, my favorite part of a show is the talk back.
Q&A. Yeah, I love it. I love it.
Is engaging folks. So, because I try to not be didactic in my work.
Yeah.
And let the allegory be the prompt for engaging whatever the issue. Maybe it's bigotry, maybe it's homophobia, maybe it's, you know, whatever. So developing characters or narratives that demonstrate bigotry without naming it as bigotry.
As such. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. E. Patrick, it's been a pleasure. I don't want to sign off, but
I know we could go on and on.
we could. Just many thanks to George Mason School of Theater, Mason Players for Change, Friends of Theater, and CVPA's Office of Marketing and Communication for their support in publicizing this event. A special shout out to our program manager, Nick Horner, who manages somehow to get us all the right link and get us here in the same room. All of these discussions, including this one, and those from previous artists and scholars are on our website. I'm going to list the artists, call them out by way of litany. Cloak Rivas, Omi Oshun, Joni L. Jones, Che Yu, Julia Cho, Mary Catherine Nagel, Nicole Salter, Luis Alfaro, Clint Ramos, P. Carl, Sharon Bridgeforth, Daniel Alexander Jones, Lisa Crone, and of course, our amazing guest, E. Patrick Johnson. Eternal thanks for being with us today. E. Patrick, it's been a pleasure. I hope our paths cross sooner than later.
Absolutely.
To everybody, be well, be safe, and whenever possible, be joyous. Till
Yes.
next time.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.